Welcome back, everyone. We've got a really cool deep dive for you all today. You know how much we love to geek out on big ideas, and this one is no exception. We've been digging into some really fascinating research about economic history.
And more specifically, how innovation shapes the world around us. It's something we all experience in our daily lives, but taking a step back and looking at the larger historical patterns, that's where things get really interesting.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we're going deep on a really powerful idea, the idea of waves of innovation. Have you ever heard of that before?
Oh, yeah, it's a fascinating concept, and it's all laid out beautifully in this book we're looking at today. It's called Waves of Innovation by Professor J. Christopher Westland.
Exactly. So big shout out to Professor Westland for laying all this out for us.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, I guess the best way to describe this idea is to imagine economies kind of like, well, waves.
And that's a perfect analogy because economies, they aren't these static things. They kind of ebb and flow.
Ah.
And these ebbs and flows are driven by these cycles of breakthrough technologies and the disruptions that come with them. It's pretty wild when you think about it.
Totally. And
Yeah.
each of these waves, it has its own kind of like signature, right? Like there's
hmm
this cluster of specific innovations that kind of come together and boom, they just completely change the game.
Like a fingerprint, each wave is unique.
So if these waves of innovation have been happening, forever, where do we fit in all of this? That's what we're going to try to, unpack today.
Well, before we jump to where we are now, we need to understand the foundation of all this. And the foundation is the work of this guy, Nikolai Kondratiev. He was a Russian economist, and back in the 1920s, he started observing these long economic cycles, these upswings and downswings that played out over decades. And they're not your typical business cycles like, the stock market going up and down every few years. We're talking about much larger, more sweeping changes in the economy. So these cycles ended up being called, you guessed it, Kondrativ wave.
Kondratiev waves. Okay, so not just like a stock market dip, but something that reshapes entire industries, like even societies
Yeah.
over like generations.
Exactly. And later on, another economist, Joseph Schumpeter, he came along and he kind of linked these Kondrativ waves, he linked them to bursts of innovation.
Ah, so that's where the innovation comes in.
Right. Schumpeter argued that, these new technologies come along and they completely disrupt the existing order and they create a boom, this like economic boom, but eventually, things settle, the technology matures, and then you need a new wave of innovation to come along and kickstart growth again.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get it, but I gotta be honest, it's still a little abstract for me.
Yeah.
Like, what would it have actually been like to live through one of these shifts? Like, can we make this a little more concrete?
Sure. Let's go back in time, way back. Imagine the late 1700s, right? Think about what was going on. Water-powered mills, they were popping up everywhere. They're revolutionizing textile production, right?
Right.
Iron is becoming cheaper and more readily available thanks to new smelting techniques. And suddenly, boom, all sorts of goods can be produced on a scale that was never seen before. That, my friend, is the first wave in action, the first wave of innovation.
So the world went from handmade to like machine made almost overnight.
Almost. It was a gradual process, of course, but compared to the centuries that came before, yeah, it was incredibly rapid change.
It must have been mind blowing for people at the time. I bet it caused a lot of like, disruption.
It absolutely did. You have to think about the social implications. All these people are moving from rural areas to cities for factory jobs, new economic powers are emerging on the world stage, fortunes are being made and lost. The entire fabric of society was changing. It was a wild time. And then, boom, a few decades later, along comes the second wave.
Which brings us steam engines, railroads, and steel.
You got it. Suddenly, we're not limited by geography anymore, at least not to the same extent. We can transport goods and people across these vast distances. It was like the world was shrinking.
And these waves build on each other.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
one of the key takeaways here. Think
Yeah.
about it. You need the cheap iron from the first wave to build the railroads and the factories of the second wave. And the transportation networks created by the second wave enable the mass production and distribution of goods made possible by the third wave. Each wave sets the stage for the next.
This is helping me understand things so much better. Okay, so we've got water power, textiles, and iron, then steam, railroads, and steel. What came next? What about the 20th century? That's when things really accelerated, right?
No, absolutely. Things went into overdrive in the 20th century. The third wave, it ushered in electricity, chemicals, and the internal combustion engine. Think about it. A world without cars, planes, or widespread access to electricity. That's the scale of the change we're talking about. And it was a game changer. It really was.
And then, of course, building on those foundations came the fourth wave.
Right. Oil, electronics, aviation, mass production, the things that really shape the world our parents and grandparents grew up in.
And it wasn't that long ago. It's amazing how much has changed in just a few generations.
It really is. And that wave, it laid the foundation for the fifth wave, the digital revolution, with semiconductors, fiber optics, genomics, and software. I mean, think about the internet. It's completely transformed the way we live, work, and communicate.
It's mind-blowing, the pace of change in the last few decades. It's almost impossible to keep up.
So, okay, we've had 5 waves of innovation, and it sounds like, according to this book, we're living in the 6th wave now. So what's driving this one? What's the defining characteristic of the 6th wave?
That's where things get really interesting, and Professor Westland lays it all out really well in his book. He calls it the innovation economy. See, in the past, the tangible drivers of these revolutions, like steam engines or electricity, they were kind of like the end game.
Yeah.
But now, those tangible things, they've become platforms. It's the ideas, the intangible things built on top of those platforms that really matter. It's like data, designs, software, processes. All these things are driving value creation in this 6th wave.
So you're saying, okay, think about your smartphone, right? Your smartphone is more than just the hardware.
Exactly. It's the apps, it's the data, it's the constant updates that make it powerful. It's the innovation that's constantly being layered on top of that physical device.
It's like the hardware is just the canvas and the software is the painting. A perfect analogy. You're getting it.
And that's the essence of the 6th wave, right? Innovation itself has become the driving force. It's not just about inventing new tangible things, but about finding new ways to use and combine existing technologies, coming up with new ideas, new processes.
Right. And this is where, it gets really thought-provoking. Professor Westland's research suggests that each wave eventually, kind of gives way to the next. So if that's the case, what might cause the decline of this 6th wave? What could the 7th wave look like?
Wow, that's a big question. And honestly, a little scary to think about.
It is a big question, but
Yeah.
also really exciting, right? We're living through a period of unprecedented technological change and innovation, and who knows what the future holds.
I know one thing, I'm definitely going to be paying more attention to these waves of innovation from now on. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive. It's given me a whole new framework for understanding how innovation shapes our world and what the future might hold.
My pleasure. It's always fun to explore these big ideas.
And for all of you listening, think about it. What do you think the 7th wave will look like? It's something to ponder, for sure.
Until next time.
See you then.